Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic indie creator interview. It's your Cape Crusader Code, and we're keeping it geekly with our new guest, David Taylor. We're here to break down wild nature and everything in between. And man, like I said backstage, I had the opportunity to read the first graphic novel, and this was just chef kiss. I love the story of Swan, and I love just how brutal this book got. But before we get to, to that gory goodness, David, welcome to the stream. How are you doing today?
I'm really great, Cody. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So how did you get involved within creating, graphic novels and comics? If I'm understanding correctly, you're not only the writer, but the artist for this series.
Yeah, that's right. So I think about 7 years ago, I decided that I'd always been an artist. I'd been to art school. I work as a copywriter in my day job. And I sat there one day and was like, if I never make a comic, I'm going to be really frustrated, and if I don't do it now, I'll probably never do it. So I wrote my first graphic novel, Decades. It took me a couple of years to work on it, self-published it. And once you've written one thing, it's really hard to stop, because you're always like, well, I could have done that better, I could have done something else. And I love comics. I think that's the biggest thing about it. I love comics, I love the medium, I love a lot of indie stuff. I love crime fiction. And I wasn't seeing an awful lot of crime comics that were the things I wanted to read. So what kind of most conceited way possible, I'm going to make them. I'm going to do this. And that's how that started. I kept going with it. I wrote a book called The Grave, which did pretty well on Kickstarter. And then I was just hooked. It's been great being part of the community. You get to speak to so many cool people, see so much creativity. And yeah, and I love being part of that. I love making stories that people seem to enjoy. And it lets me get the strange things that are living in my head. It gets them on paper and then out of my head, which feels like a good outcome for me.
Mm-hmm. So a graphic novel, that seems like a big thing to dive into. I often hear diving into smaller pages is often the way to kind of step into it. What drove you to kind of just take on the biggest bite you could dive into?
A lack of thinking it through. It was just all the stories I tend to have. They're quite big in concept. A lot of the stuff I enjoy most is the long form. I think when I was growing up, although I did read comics as a kid, it was really when I started getting graphic novels from my local library that I really fell in love with a lot of the stuff. And I remember reading Watchmen or The Dark Knight Returns, and then later on there was Sin City and The Crow and a lot of stuff like that. And I read them as books. I didn't read them as individual issues. I didn't collect story arcs or anything. So that was the stuff that spoke to me most. And I like long form stories. I like spending lots of time with the characters. I'm not great at editing myself, so it was a way to just spend time doing stuff. And yeah, it was just how it turned out. It wasn't a conscious plan. There was just no way that the stories I was thinking of could work as a short. So I just went with it, and it was a real kind of jumble for a while. Just weird ideas, having to rework things all the time. But I like reading that stuff. I love when I see creators making full books. It's it lets me explore what's going on in their heads, see the way they see the world, really get into the characters. So I wanted to do the same thing.
So was that your first experience diving into sequential art, or did you have any experience prior to that?
Just lots of little things I'd done when I was in my early teens, or bits and pieces over the years. I tried to make comics multiple times, and it just never quite stuck because I didn't feel I had the right tools, or I didn't have the right story. I hadn't developed as a writer. Hadn't really thought what I wanted to talk about. So I'd have this great initial burst of 5 pages. Oh, this looks so cool. It didn't look cool, it looked terrible. But in my head it did. And I just kind of gave up on it. So I tried bits and pieces. I read books all the time. And I think it was just, it was the right moment that I'd stopped some of the other things I've been doing, creative hobbies. I had lots of space all of a sudden. I was living in another country. I wasn't living at home. I thought, well, I've got time, I've got space to focus on it. So it's a good thing to learn. It's another skill. It's another thing I can say I've done. And I always wanted to be able to say I was a storyteller. And this felt like the right moment to try it.
So what was that first graphic novel about?
Decades is a serial killer story. So it's about a detective called James McLeod. 10 years before the story begins, he catches the killer called the Huntsman. The arrest goes badly wrong, and he ends up leaving the police force because of it. And then a decade on, he gets the chance to go back to the case and find out the full extent of what the killer did. And what he uncovers kind of changes his perceptions of the case, his perceptions of himself, and perceptions of a lot of the people around him. It was I like killer thrillers.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
I don't like is I really enjoy them as a genre, but a lot of the time they're a bit superficial. I would say they like very high concept. Sorry, just one sec.
In just a few moments, guys, we will. Oh, right there we go. Welcome back, David.
Sorry,
Not a problem.
I have a time limit on my screen and it shut me off.
Oh, no.
Apologies.
Well, hey,
that was
post production, I can clip that out, so we'll
Yeah.
copy and paste that. Not a problem.
So, what's on? Oh yeah, so I love a lot of stuff with serial killer thrillers. The problem with them a lot of the time is that they're a bit glib about killing, and that they treat that serial killers are really fascinating, intelligent people, and generally they're not. And so I wanted to write something that was a bit more grounded about what I knew about psychological profiling, about the way killers behave, and really explore the impact of a serial killer investigation, what it does to people, and the guilt that comes out of it. Because I like dealing with light themes, obviously, in my stories. That felt like a good one to start with. So it came from an initial idea from a case I'd read about from years ago that happened in England. And I just sort of expanded it and started thinking about what would have led to this. And I just got to explore fascinating characters, people that are quite damaged but don't want to admit it. And play in a genre that I love. There's not a huge amount of comics about serial killer investigations, certainly not procedurals and certainly not psychological things. So it was another one. I say it was a jumble how it came together. I remastered it last year, and it's been my biggest success of my short comics career. Thank you. So that was awesome that it found its audience finally, which has been amazing. But yeah, that was my first book 5 or 6 years ago.
So, I mean, how'd we end up leading to Wild Nature? This is such an interesting concept. It almost, to me, feels like, have you ever seen The Warriors?
I have. Yes.
So it's like a brutal version of The Warriors, it almost feels like, in a game format. I don't know how better to explain it. I just loved how, like, brutal this was. Like, what served as the inspiration for this?
The Warriors is one of them.
Dude, that's awesome.
It is one of them. Yeah, I love The Warriors. It was The Running Man, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film, not the short story it's based on. And there's a video game called Hotline Miami. And it was those three things in my head jumbled up. And like the movie The Running Man's kind of really interesting. It's like really good fun.
Isn't that where he's running and they're trying to kill him?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I read the book. Yeah,
and the film's fun. The film's light as a feather. There's not much. There's more in it than you first think. But it's this whole idea you've got in the game show. The runners are being stopped by the stalkers, who are the kind of killers, and the game show kind of plays with it in a fairly light way. But there was something to me that was really interesting. Like, what sort of society would you live in where that would happen? What would the people who are in the game show really be like? Like these stalkers, what would their behavior? So I wanted to make a story about that. And then it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. So I started thinking about what might have happened in the world that would have led to this sort of quite dystopian, futuristic Miami where the story's set, and what things would have come out of it. And it'd be this kind of death sport called Wild Nature. And all the combatants wear animal masks. And the guy that created it is the main character, Swan. And Swan, he's the greatest of all time, but Swan wants to retire, and the sport's not really ready to let him go. So it started off as being this story about someone who's involved in a very violent life trying to become a better human being, and it became a much bigger thing about family and friendship and loyalty, but with people with animal masks trying to kill each other in it as well. So I'm trying to tick all the boxes all in one, but yeah, it was a jumble of ideas that came together and was just fun. It was fun spending time with all those characters because they've all got weird things going on with them. They're all really big, outsized personalities, and there's just so much conflict with it. And then, yeah, the thing you said about the Warriors, I love the costumes of it. I love all the different personalities and the very comic book video game nature of it in the first place. And I thought that'd be a cool thing to pull into it too.
No, I love that a lot. And we have someone over on YouTube. Sorry if I butchered this pronunciation. I think you gave it to me last time, but I'm spacing on it this time. Marvy saying greetings and fantastic art, just dropping in over on YouTube. Thank you for stopping in. I have a image slideshow of what you sent me from the drive, the Google Drive. So it's like the I don't know how to explain it. It's like the blue and the pink, like super futuristic looking art print, and then Swan standing with the American flag at his back. So we have that on the image slideshow next to us.
Cool.
This art style is gorgeous. You know, what type of techniques did you implement when creating this? I mean, the first graphic novel itself is 87 pages, and guys, if you are watching, you can go to David's Substack right here and sign up and get a chance to read the graphic novel for free. So if you love this art, you can get a chance to read this for free digitally just for signing up.
Yeah, I mean, the art stuff. So I work digitally. That's the first thing. I use Procreate for pretty much everything. And like the stuff I enjoy most, it's like artists like Mike Avon-Oeming, Darwin Cook, who's probably my absolute hero of all time. There's a lot of Frank Miller in what I do. Would be disingenuous to suggest otherwise. It's pretty obvious. But I love that big chunky lines. I like boldness. John Romita Jr. when he was working with Klaus Janson back in like the 90s. I love that kind of big, thick, atmospheric style. And it's just developed over the years. It started off, I suppose, because my editor, Claire, often refers to it as an architectural, because everything's so chunky and built out of these quite big blocks. I think it's a compliment. I'm going to take it as a compliment.
It sounds like a compliment.
Yeah, and it's like, and I think there's a lot of presence. I think that's kind of what I go for. I like things to feel very imposing, and it's just it's developed over the years, and I got more confident in the last year and a half about just bigger, bolder lines and allowing stuff to flow through. So I think that cover of Swan with the flag behind him is a homage to a Captain America cover from the 1980s. And it just felt quite perfect for what I was trying to say about the character and the world that he exists in. That kind of hyper violent. It's very American, that tone of like a lot of love for violence in media. And it's a pretty cheap shot, I suppose, in some ways. But I just quite like the visual of it. I thought it was perfect for my story. But yeah, I've been working on that for years. I love those big kind of chunky, very expressive lines. And the great thing about working digitally is I can just keep going back over into the line that feels like it's doing the right thing for me. I can be really rough with it. I can let things stand out and not worry about ruining my paper.
No, that is definitely, I'm not an artist. I've always wanted to get into it. I look at art like this and I'm just so mesmerized. I'm like, how, I have no idea where to even begin on it. It is just absolutely gorgeous. And the rest of the graphic novel is just as gorgeous. Once again, the first one is 87 pages. The second one, a whopping 94 as well. Just some awesome content. And then the editor, Claire, we've had her on for the Magic Necklace for her Zoop campaign. So that was an awesome, awesome small world here going on. I really love it. So, as someone who creates really complex characters, was there any special symbolism with making them wear masks, hiding their identity behind a mask, anything with that?
Yeah, there was. I went through a few different iterations with it because I was going to do something much more complicated at first, and it'd be related to the kind of Jungian archetypes, but that was getting a bit heavy for what I was trying to talk about as the character piece. But the nice thing about the masks is that there's the inherent and obvious thing that you're hiding your face. And is it because you want to be someone else? And I don't want to ruin like the major revelation Swan eventually has about his choice to wear the mask. But there's a thing I refer to as the dark voice throughout the story. And Swan's kind of got this nagging voice in his head of an undescribed tormentor who basically provokes him to do worse and worse things. And certainly as the story is set up, it's the mask that is speaking to him and is in there. And I like the idea of that you've got kind of another self, because all of us do. I like the idea that the mask is basically his worst impulses and that horrible nagging voice that tells you you're not doing a good job, that you're failing at life, that you're a bit of a disaster. It was a way of exploring that, but without having a voice that explains what's happening in the story, because I don't like thought bubbles particularly. I don't like having narration in that way. I want to try and embed it in the story. So that was a fun thing to do, and it let me dial up some of the action, put a bit more context behind some of the violent moments, why things go a certain way. But the masks otherwise, they were just a really great way of making characters stand out. Because there's things like, you see a fox, you assume there's kind of a stealthiness to it. They're seen as being kind of tricksters, and Fox, the actual character, is that way. And you've got Rabbit. Rabbits are seen as playful. They're seen as kind of frisky in that way. And so it was a fun way of just having quick visual shorthand to make that clear to someone reading it. And then it was really easy. It made it easy to understand who was who on each page. And I think certainly with the amount of dark scenes, it was another way of having kind of really impactful silhouettes. So there was a lot of decision making, some psychological, some just really good design practice. and ways that would help me make clear to a reader what was going on.
I really loved your usage of like the color palettes for the more darker moments, like the usage of blues and blacks for the more darker, the more stealthier moments. And those masks. I mean, for swans are elegant. They're beautiful, right? Like this swan is dark, bloody, dangerous. Yeah. His thought bubbles when he has them are all black with red words, like very ominous. Like
yeah, and just I mean, swans are beautiful. They look elegant, but swans are badasses. And they are fierce. Like they will come at you. I've got swans that live in the park just down from where I live, and like if you go anywhere near them when they've got their sickness, they will go at you. They have no fear, and it was that kind of element really appealed to me about a swan.
And don't they have like gnarly teeth or something like inside?
No, but they can bite very hard.
Okay, all right.
They're strong enough. I mean, without getting into a whole story, I love swans. I find them fascinating.
Wait, do you have a swan story?
No, disappointing me. I wish I did. No, maybe I should make one up. Maybe I should just like create one so I can have one for down the line.
This? I had to fight off a barrage of them in army.
I'd have lost. I wouldn't be here now. I think that'd be the point.
So we actually have a really good question over on YouTube. I always like to know who inspires artists. So who inspired you from Marvy over on YouTube?
Sure. The biggest single creator that inspired me is going to be Frank Miller. There's no doubt from the point where I first read. It probably is dark. It was Daredevil actually. It was the Daredevil stuff. It was when I read that I'd never seen something that could feel so graphic and so exciting, and so just felt alive on the page. And there's some very crude things about how Frank Miller's art looks, but there's something about that makes them feel very present, and I really enjoyed that. And he writes in kind of that really pulp story idiom that just as a child, well, kind of quite early teens, it made sense to me. So a lot of that really stayed with me. So that's one. Kind of bigger influences, the filmmaker Michael Mann. I always go back to his stuff. I just love it. I love the time he'll spend with characters and really get to know people and let you see things you wouldn't normally see in a lot of other genre movies. David Lynch, love David Lynch. A lot of stuff comes into there. But probably after that, the person that really got me wanting to make comics was Darwin Cook. When Darwin Cook's Parker adaptations came out, The Hunter was the first of them. I remember sitting reading it on a bus and like my mind being blown as I was reading it. It was like everything I'd ever wanted a crime comic to be was in this book. And it was perfect. And I still think it's like one of the great achievements of all comics. And I had to make comics after reading it. And every time I read it, if ever I'm feeling low on inspiration, I go and read one of those books, and it kind of brings me back in. So if I could be anybody in comics, it'd probably be Darwin Cook. Just his absolute gift for bringing lines to life. Yeah, it's unsurpassed, I think.
So, I mean, now, after talking about influences, let's get back into, your history as a creator. How would you say you developed over the last 3 years on this project?
I never had a style or a structure for how I went for things. And I realized that after my second book, The Grave, it had been a bit of a trauma getting through it, to be honest. I rewrote the entire second half of it on the fly because it just wasn't making sense. So I decided I was going to get an editor, which is Claire Napier, who we just mentioned a bit earlier. And so I asked around, people recommended her, and Claire gave me all these brilliant prompts to get me started thinking about my characters in more depth. And I would say in the past I was quite plot oriented. I would always think about how do I need things to happen to keep the story moving. And after working with Claire, I sort of stopped all of that. I might have an idea of some things I'd want to happen, but what I do instead now is I write out about the characters and I spend time thinking about who the characters are, what would they agree with, what would kind of push them in different directions, and what's the world they're living in like. And it's changed everything about how I write. I find writing stories really easy now because I always start from those principles. The characters will tell you what they want and what they want to do. And Wild Nature started off being a fairly silly kind of genre thing. I say people in animal mass killing each other, and it kind of quickly evolved into this really quite painful study of someone being very, very lonely. Struggling to make relationships, struggling to feel like they're part of the world because they're fighting against their instincts all the time. And then all the other characters have got just as many weird issues going on as well. So you've got people suffering from grief. They've lost one of the characters. Her brother has died.
Oh, yeah.
And she blames Swan for it. You've got Jack, who's like the other co-founder of Wild Nature, is struggling with his own failures as a businessman. And he also misses his best friend, even though he can't really admit it to himself. And you've got all these people going on with those conflicts. And I would never have done that 3-4 years ago. That's not how I would have done things. Mm-hmm. Whereas now it generates so many other things. The story's gone in so many other directions because of it. There's a much deeper backstory to the characters. The Death Sport's still it's the flagship thing that's the whole thing's building towards. That's not a spoiler. It's pretty obvious, I think. But what happened in the background, what led there is the actual main event. It's the people and the lives they led that brought them to this point. So I've changed fundamentally. I see much deeper opportunities in the stories. I see much more space to express themes. And I play with ideas in a way I didn't play with before. Mm-hmm. And like certain action scenes will happen that, how can I talk about my characters without talking at all? How can I make them do something in a fight scene that tells me everything about who they are and where they've been? And I think it's made the stories richer. And, I'm really hoping when I finish the series of Wild Nature 3 that's going to take it to a bigger audience and people are going to get to see the whole thing all the way through, all 250 pages of it when it's all done.
Wow, so the third one's going to be 250 or 250 for all three?
For all three, so...
Okay, I was like, dang, David, you are going all out.
I don't have time. I don't have time for a 250-page part. But yeah, part 3 will be 128 pages roughly. So it's the longest. It'll be, and overall, the whole thing will be the longest story I've ever written. Mm-hmm.
So I love how the Death Sport almost acts like a mask within this story. Like that's the mask to like the complex character development and stories behind the mask. And you were talking about Jack a little bit. I mean, even within the first graphic novel, you see him holding that necklace and looking at it and admiring it. So I love how you're able to hit these beats with just the small attention to the details without like drowning the reader with throwing it in their face.
Yeah, and I think it's like, for me as a reader, I hate things being explained to me. Mm-hmm. I hate people saying this character now feels sad, and and like making a big thing that's really obvious to everyone. It's a bit of a turn off. I like just seeing how people react. I like expressions, and that little scene with the necklace that Swan has bought him as a gift earlier in a kind of flashback. There's a lot of it was another way. How can I show there's a genuine emotional connection between two people? And it was a nice way of doing it because it when you read the scene, it plays through so many things in a few pages about this depth of feeling between the two of them that they're both trying to pretend they don't feel. And I think that's also, I'm really interested in that sort of male relationship anyway, that it's often really hard for men to say that, you love one of your friends and that you're really sad you're not seeing them or you're not talking to them anymore. And I thought that was, to me, quite an elegant way of doing it. And I got to draw a skull. And that's never a bad thing.
Yeah, isn't it funny how we could always, like, men are always cool about killing, but when it comes to touching your feelings and inner like emotions, that's hard. That's hard to do, but we can shoot people in the head all day long.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. It's like Swan's whole thing, and again, no spoiler in this. You express your anger and your fear and your disappointment by being violent. Mm-hmm. Like your only response to like being sad is to be angry, and that's that. It's not, I'm not the first person to explore it, but it's like, it gives you so much room to talk about different things and show them in different ways. So yeah, it's great it's sometimes weird spending time in his head because he's a troubled individual. That's much of a secret, but all those little details were ways I could bring things out, kind of create that emotional resonance for someone reading it. And for me, I want myself to feel something about it.
Yeah, and I really thought it was interesting, too, how the first graphic novel began. We have Swan, like, pretty much at the tail end of his career, and everyone wants him to come back. The whole audience is, like, begging for him to come back, and he's, like, really not wanting to go back into this life. We see this cold-blooded killer start to evolve, and even within one of those matches, he hesitates a little bit before killing, but because he's a showman, he likes to showboat, he likes to kill people in front of the cameras just to get that kill across the board. So I loved how you started packing that emotion with him so early on, and then to see it like evolve, years later, and the reluctancy to come back to it. I love like what goes into creating a character of this nature. Not to play on the name too much, but it seems like there's just so many layers to him.
Yeah, I mean, you can claim the name because I do it constantly. I think I use it, but it gets used constantly throughout the book. Um, so it was mostly like coming back to that thing I was talking about earlier with the Running Man. One of the things in the Running Man is that there's this hidden thing to the characters that nobody explores. Like, why would you choose to be this? What would make them? It's too easy to go, oh, they're just sociopathic or they're just sadistic. And when I started exploring it, it comes back to, you're probably going to be a pretty damaged person. You're going to be someone who's learned that violence is your primary currency transaction with people. That's how you express your value. And the more I started thinking about that, well, if that's how you've ever defined yourself, and maybe you've just lost the nerve, or maybe you're scared to admit you still have it, and that felt like a really good thing. Like, so if the question is, what's your wild nature? You've got this guy that he wants to believe he's better. He wants to believe he's not violent. He wants to believe that he's a good person. He can be part of the world, but he kind of knows he isn't, because he hasn't created peace with what he is and the things he wants to do and the reasons why he wants to do them. And so the complexity comes out of, how do I talk about that? How do I look at all the different things that conflict? And we all do. We all have things that, there's stuff that I'll get really bad tempered about. And it makes no sense to me because it hits me on the wrong point and I get frustrated. I thought, well, let's look at some of those things, like what frustrates me in my relationships. There's always been the ongoing conversation about toxic masculinity over the last 5-6 years in particular. I thought that gave me lots of things thinking about, why is aggression such a way of expressing, even what you said there, we like shooting people in the head in video games all the time. We're really comfortable with that. But something that requires us to express an emotion is seen as really difficult. And then there's a comic called Zero, which was written by Alice Cott. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he did a whole bunch of things about shame. It was about male shame and how it creates violence as well. And I wanted to look at it from my own perspective, which is shame's a part of it. But grief and loss, they are things that also make you want to be aggressive and want to be angry with people. And I thought that was something that was kind of interesting. And then that led me back around to, traumatic childhoods. All these things kind of started coming out. And so the more I explored those characters and the more I built up that character framework, I just asked myself questions. Why would he be angry? Why would that be a bad thing? Why would that be something that was triggering to him? And it let me create this backstory piece by piece that then could come into the story in lots of different ways. So that reluctance in that early match is because he is questioning, is this who I want to be? And someone confronting him calls back to something that happens later in the first part. A conversation he has 10 years before is asking him the same question, what's your wild nature, basically? And he doesn't have an answer. And he realizes that he's taken this mask off in this moment. Who is he underneath it? And so it lets me pose lots of things and it lets me play with lots of ideas. And it's playing, genuinely. It's just like, I look at all the possibilities and what's the one that feels most emotionally true to me? What gives me goosebumps? And just going with that.
I love that moment too, where, because the moment you remove a mask, you add a sense of humanity to the character. We've seen that with the Mandalorian. The second he took that mask off, we added a sense of humanity to him. And that was kind of the similar response I felt with Swan when the Wasp was looking up and Swan removes that mask and it's like, who am I like? And then I was like, wow. And there was another moment of importance that really just struck me when they were creating the original creation of Wild Nature. And he's like, for people like me, he's like, I think you nailed it on the head when, he's so damaged that maybe creating something like this would make him feel more human because then he's surrounded by people like him. It really adds a lot of just hard hitting questions like, is Swan a bad person? Like, he's a product of his environment, I love this. We have a Marv, same here. I do horror comics and completely agree with you. And then the plot is amazing. Are you crowdfunding it? We're actually going to be seeing this hit crowdfunding for the third graphic novel, the 120 page. You said in May?
In May. It'll be very early in May. I'm just working on I'm finishing off the third volume at the moment, catchily titled Wild Nature 3. And that'll, so it's all going well. I'm building the Kickstarter page at the moment. So probably the first week in May. I haven't quite decided. I'll see how I get on.
So right there is David's Substack. You can subscribe to that. It's free to subscribe. You get a free graphic novel, and you can get updated as soon as that Kickstarter goes live. David, what type of tiers and rewards can we expect from this Kickstarter? Do you have anything that you can announce?
Yeah, sure. So all the volumes so far have all been hardbacks, and volume 3 will also be a hardback. So you'll be able to get that. I think I've got 50 bundles of the original 2 books. So I'm going to do a special collector's bundle, which you can get along with volume 3 and have the whole set. And then assuming I sell through them, which I hope I do, there'll be the collected edition, which will be a big, like 250, 260 page paperback,
Oh, wow.
which will be available as well. There'll be some original art. There'll be some prints. So that one you mentioned earlier with Swan and the American flag. I also do some risograph prints. I'm trying to see if I've got one still sitting near me. I don't. Which are beautiful, like super vibrant neon colors. Absolutely beautiful print kind of format. So I have some prints of those. I'll have my other books, so you'll be able to get copies of Decades, The Grave, and not the Her shorts because I'm out of print of them, but maybe the digital versions. I'll do full digital bundles as well. And I'm looking at maybe doing some stuff for other creators. So if you want me to spend some time helping you develop your script or develop some character kind of stuff or world building, I'll offer that as a tier as well. It's always good to kind of share the stuff I've learned. If it helps people as well, that might be a bit self-serving, but it makes me feel good. And hopefully, on the back of this, if I can get everything aligned for it, I want to do a commentary, basically a digital director's cut of the book, where you can see all the making of. You'll get to see some of the original layouts. I can talk through the whole process, and I'll have a couple of friends on it with me, kind of talking about creating in general, and how you work on a story for so long.
That's awesome. I mean, guys, once again, right there is the link. Be sure to sign up so you do not miss when this Kickstarter goes live. I can't wait. It sounds like some awesome tiers. We'll have to try to get you back on so we can deep dive some of those tiers too if we have the time. David, so what's next for you in 2023? Are you just focused on crowdfunding the third graphic novel, or do you have any other stories that you're going to be working on?
I've got 2 I'm going to be working on. So
wow,
I'll be working on. Oh yeah, it never stops. But one, you'll understand why it's not so bad in a second. So the first is remastering The Grave, my second graphic novel. It came out in a kind of a digest size. It wasn't a huge book. I wanted to reissue it as a hardback in full size. I want to re-letter a bit of it, and I want to tidy up the art, put some of the making of stuff. So all my books are available in hardback, basically. So that'd be good. So if people missed out on that a few years back, they'll get a chance to get it for now. It's funny to think it's been 5 years since I crowdfunded it. It's absolutely insane. But that'll be in 2024. That'll be out. And then I'm working on a story called Her Hard-Boiled Heart. And a couple of short stories with this character. It's kind of a feminist noir. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes behind it. But basically, someone bought the rights to make a film of it. That film is in the process of being made. And it sort of inspired me to think differently about what I was doing with the character. So I've come up with this much bigger scope for this character and the world that they'll exist in. And it's much more of an espionage thriller, still in the noir space. I still love working in that kind of idiom.
That's so awesome.
But hoping that I can get the first chunk of that out in 2024 as well. And I'll be posting updates and kind of preview stuff on my Substack. Going to be trying and posting on that every week, as well as some process things for anybody, because the process junkies like me who like seeing other people create stuff. But yeah, just working hard on that. Got a bunch of concept art I've been sharing on my Twitter. I think my first Substack post actually has some of the Her stuff in it, so if people want to go and have a look, they can go and see it there.
And then we have David's Twitter in the description below. So if you guys want to follow him on Twitter, be sure to check out the description and give him a follow as well. It's, social media stuff is always free to do, and that's the easiest way to support creators and help get their work spread out farther and farther. So David, before we let you go real quick, I always love asking a little bit of advice. So for anyone out there, struggling to come up with an interesting character, maybe their character is falling flat a little bit 2D and they're trying to make their character a little bit more 3D, add some more flavor to them. What would be your suggestion to kind of add a little bit more complexity to a character?
In the weirdest way, and it sounds really superficial, think about what they wear. Write down the clothes they would choose, why they choose to wear them, what it says about them. And just by talking about it, we all do it every day. The things like you're wearing a Jurassic Park t-shirt, I'm wearing a polo shirt that makes me look like a bee. These are choices we make, and they let you explore. They let you ask questions like, why did you choose that t-shirt? And even if it's like, I just chose it because it's the first thing I saw, that's a character thing as well.
Oh my God, what to say about my character, David?
That's going to be at the end of Wild Nature 3. So I'll include you. You can get to be a cameo, Cody. But that'd be my biggest tip is go back, do something as simple as that. What's the way you dress? How do they dress? Why do they dress that way? it lets you ask so many interesting questions about the sort of person you are, where you shop, what you're comfortable in, what size you are. So start there, and you'll start finding other things that let you make that character just a bit more interesting.
You know, I'm gonna be honest. I seen that art print, and it was a little. It had like the funky colors in it, right? The yellow, the blue, and the pink. So I was groggy. I woke up. I usually wake up about an hour and a half, 2 hours before an interview. Spend about an hour prepping. So I was like looking. I was like, okay, well, this is the image, and it was the first shirt on the rack. I was like, that's gonna be perfect. Has nothing to do with the story, but the color palette like works.
No, yeah, exactly. That tells me something about you. Like, we're thinking about how do you tie into the theme of what you're discussing.
And like, I never get a chance to really talk about that, but I try to do that, like, in subtle ways, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you've got the PlayStation kind of, is it a light? Kind of just by your side, which is like, it's really cool. It's like, it's these little details, like the things you choose to have in your world. The fact I've got the big, can I go the other way? There we are. The big Sin City art book behind me. It's a conscious choice. I put it there on purpose. It's not there just, I mean, I like it as part of my decor, but so these are things like they make you ask other questions about things, and it makes you consider the world that person lives in, and it's the easiest way to expand your character just a little.
I love that. So, David, what have you been reading lately? Any, or watching any new movies or books?
Yeah. So, like, I think what feels like every human being on Earth, I was watching the TV show of The Last of Us. Which I really enjoyed. Really enjoyed overall. I thought there was some really cool stuff came out of it. I thought Pedro and Bella are absolutely amazing. There was stuff there. Some of the lines, obviously, I'm trying to avoid any spoilers. People played the game; it's not a spoiler, but there's a line in the final episode that Pedro Pascal says about it wasn't time that healed it, and it absolutely devastated me. Just the way he said it, and like the look on Bella Ramsey's face is just beautiful, and like that's the sort of stuff that's inspiring to me. Like, how can you find a line so simple that says so much in that moment? I'll just pull my head from it, and then.
So inspirational. We lost the headphones.
Yeah, exactly. I read Zoe Thorogood's graphic novel, It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth, which is fabulous. I saw everybody, like a bunch of like comics pros were writing about it. Like, Zoe's brilliant. I've read Billy Scott. I've met Billy a couple of times at Thought Bubble, one of the conventions over in the UK. But I saw these like pros like writing about it, talking about how it plays with the medium and all this cool stuff about storytelling. But what I took from it was like, this person being super vulnerable and sharing like how they feel about themselves and the world they live in. It was like really gorgeous stuff. And then I tend to read like mostly indie stuff, and I tend to read mostly crowdfunded stuff now. But yeah, John Lees, a Scottish comic creator, and The Crimson Cage, which I thought was fantastic. Loved that, with an artist called Alex Cormack. And then I just kind of go around finding other stuff. I'm trying to think of other books. There's so much stuff I get through. It's hard to pick it out, but yeah, The Last of Us was the last thing I watched all the way through, and then I watched lots of true crime stuff as well, perhaps unsurprisingly given my other interests, but yeah, so I just try and absorb ideas. But yeah, those would be the things that have really stuck out to me recently that I felt the need to tell people about.
Awesome. Hey, David, I appreciate you coming on here talking wild nature, giving me the opportunity to read the first 2 graphic novels as well. It's been a blast. Everyone watching, right here is the link for the Substack. It's free to subscribe, so make sure to do that and share it with your friends so they don't miss out on that opportunity as well. With that being said, it's time to wrap up. I hope you all have a lovely Thursday, but most importantly, guys, keep it geekly.